Hey guys, I've had a lot of people asking me how I made my McFarlane Batmobile, how I done all my custom work on it. And I thought I would take a little bit of time to explain that, try to anyway. For the guns, this is all I used. An X-Acto knife like you can buy at any hobby store anywhere, Walmart. And took about 3 hours, 3.5 hours, slowly just tracing over to finally cut all the way through. The bottom portion of the assembly, the door, had to be sanded off because it was just too bulky. And then I simply just added a magnet to it. For the gun itself, I had to specially make the gun tray, which I used a piece of wood. Now the hinges itself are a little bit tricky. I tried to think of a mechanism that would actually pop them up by spring loaded, but it just wasn't going to work out. I've done taking all this apart just for the sake of it. Now for my canopy, set that aside. For my canopy, this is the stock canopy. This part here and about the right here. The rest of it is Bondo. I had to completely cut out the glass, and then to get the right shape, I just made a big blob of Bondo body filler. It doesn't look the prettiest on the inside. All this is resin that I had to pour in there to make it a lot sturdier. And then the glass is a little tricky for the glass, but nobody sees that part anyway. But it gives it the correct slope and angle. Now the heavy modifying came in here. These two posts here, screw posts, on the inside. Again, nobody ever sees this part of it. They had to be modified here. I had to cut those completely out. It doesn't affect the stability of the car at all. You still have 1, 2, 3, 4. You got like 6 post screw holes. As you can see how I had to do the mechanism. I had to cut out some to make room for that. I had to cut out the cockpit to make room for it. That's the only modifying I did to the cockpit itself. As for the turbine was a little trickier. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. On the front axle, for whatever reason, McFarlane made the front wheels like a 1/4 inch wider than the back wheels. It made no sense. And they're still wider, but what I had to do to make them work and fit better, I cut the original axle out and I took about a 1/4 inch off of each wheel. Again, nobody sees it, nobody knows but me, but it makes it stick back under the fender like it should. New axle works fine. It's just as straight as what he had on it. This part here is a holder for when the turbine slides back in. My turbine itself is just this part here is an old Toy Biz Batmobile wheel. The fins itself are made, I sculpted that, and then I made a mold, put it all together. This is just resin that I poured into a super glue tube, and then I sanded it right. And then once I had this assembly all together, I made a mold of it. In theory, I can make as many of them as I need, which I did have to make one for my 89 Batman RC from Richmond. All this is just an aluminum tube from a flashlight. PVC, just bits and pieces of little things that I had laying around the house. When it slides in, it comes back here and it's got that opening that holds it in place. Now on the main front end, this part actually came with the stock turbine, which I had to slowly Dremel the stock turbine out because I still needed this portion here. What I done then, I had to add a ring inside of it to be able to hold the turbine in. That's the only thing that just friction is all that holds the turbine in. Comes out like that. I would say the trickiest part was cutting out for the machine guns, because if you mess up, it's pretty well ruined. You just have to take your time. The turbine, the afterburner, there's not much you can do with it other than just give it a paint job to make it look like it's been heated up, like on the actual car. Kind of a silvery to purple, bluish. For the ridiculously huge, cartoonish, whatever these are, exhaust, we'll call them exhaust, I cut probably a good 1/4 inch off of them, and I added the little tips. As you can see on this 1/18 scale, which is made like it should have been made, I tried to make mine as close to that as possible. I mean, I wouldn't recommend, to each their own, but I like a little bit more detail. And yes, I could have made the interior 2-seater, but I really didn't care so much about it because I've never even had a figure in this one. Probably never will. But it's a lot scarier thinking about doing it than it is actually doing it. That's like cutting the wheels. It just adds that little bit more realism to it, I think. The machine guns themselves, they are actually the right machine gun that was on the Batmobile itself. They're Browning 1919s. I thought of where to get one in 1/12 scale, and I never could find any that matched. And then I remembered that I had in storage a McFarlane Terminator 3 T800 with the coffin that he carried on his shoulder. He came with one. It had a handle on it. It had a special belt clip, magazine clip. That had to go, but other than that, I made a mold of this, of one. These are actually resin copies. But I made a mold. I saved the original just in case, and they turned out pretty good. Again, I was going to make a mechanism, but from what I can tell, just picture-wise of Hot Toys, this is about how they make theirs. It's just, there's a little hinge here and a little hinge here, and the hinge goes to this way back here. It protrudes way back into it, but it doesn't interfere once you make the cutouts. These are wood. I made those. I'm a woodworker by trade, and I routed all those out. But all in all, they've worked pretty good, and they're pretty accurate. The main tip I would give with that is just try not to lose patience with it. I almost did with these. It's really thick, but underneath, that was the hardest part to cut through, because this part comes out, and I don't really know why they made them like that, to clip in. It's hard to tell with McFarlane. You can never tell with them. They're hit or miss so much. It's like they got the Batmobile 55%, well, 75% right, and then they just cheaped out on the rest of it. And I know a lot of people say it's because of the price point, but the issues it has could have been made right, and it wouldn't have cost any more. That's like the canopy. I honestly believe that McFarlane thought that Batman had to see out of his toy car. But that's an argument that's already been talked about a lot. The gas caps, basically my Toy Biz, I made a mold with my, I can't remember what it was. I think it was Sculpey. I pressed it onto it, and then I made resin copies, and those are resin. The little non-slip foot pads, I put those on there. People have asked me why that I haven't bondoed the seam here and filled it in. It really doesn't bother me that bad. So that would have been kind of a really hard seam to fill up, just like with the fins. It could have been done, but it would have been body work that would have been really noticeable. And as far as lighting it up, I lit my 89 Richmond up, and I just didn't want to light this one up. I figured these were good enough. They look decent enough. It's as close to accurate as far as body-wise as McFarlane's ever going to get. There's not much better that I think's going to happen. It's like the re-release, the gold label Batman. It's okay. This is the custom I done. The body, McFarlane done great. The head is just awful. That doesn't look like Keaton. That had to go. This is a custom that I made. It has articulation, but it doesn't ruin the effect with the neck. Even the Mezco would fit right on top of it. This is one that I made for Batman Returns. That's a reproduction. This is one. This is a stock Mezco. What I did, I made a mold, and then I can make as many of them as I want. And I add the articulation in. I haven't put the magnet in yet. I'm not sure if I'm going to glue it down. I'm going to leave the gold because I kind of like it. It reminds me of the Kenner Batman, which that's another thing. Kenner 30 years ago got a better likeness to Keaton than this. This is not Michael Keaton, but it's McFarlane, you never can tell. Some figures they get spot on, other figures they just, I don't know what gets in their mind. I just don't understand them. But that is, for the most part, what I did to this. And even though it's